So talk about communism. Justin Trudeau. So no, just kidding. Maybe not really. But Justin Trudeau has it plans on hiking the carbon tax on April 1st. And I believe that it's 23% hike. So, when I say 23%, like people can't do math, right? So I'm not saying that like everything's going to go up by 23%. I mean, the tax itself is going to go up by 23%, right? So let me just make that clear. It's like not going to be exactly like a 23% increase in everything, but it's still a significant increase in carbon tax that we'd all have to pay, right? So this planned increase of the carbon tax is estimated to cost gas to make gas prices rise by 3 cents per liter. So I don't know what the conversion is. If you're American, you're just gonna have to, figure that out. But just to like give you some perspective, right now in Ontario, the gas is about $1.40 per liter, or maybe $1.45 per liter. So, a 3 cent increase is not like unnoticeable. It's not like absolutely crushing, but over the long term, especially if you have to drive to work and stuff, you will notice it. And it's also not just fuel, but also heating costs, right? So if your home runs on natural gas or heating oil or all this stuff like fossil fuels, you're going to have to pay the extra tax on that too. There's already a carbon tax there, but it's going to go up as of April 1st. So a lot of people are unhappy about this. And we talked about the carbon tax extensively last episode. So if you missed that, please go watch it. But essentially, uh, like the conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, has planned to vote a no confidence vote in Parliament to trigger an election, which he calls the carbon tax election. Now, before you guys get excited, this is mostly symbolic because right now uh, the Liberals, who's Justin Trudeau's party, along with the NDP, who's the I guess left-leaning Democratic Socialist Party, and they together hold a majority in Parliament, right? So if they band together, they could defeat this motion. And I think literally like 30 minutes before we started this podcast, the news came in that this motion was defeated at the hands of everyone except for the conservatives. Basically, the Quebec party, the Bloc Québécois, also voted against this non-confidence vote, so they voted to keep Trudeau for now. So if you guys don't know, if you lose a no confidence vote, then it triggers a snap election. So unfortunately, there's not going to be an election anytime soon, it looks like. And the next regularly scheduled election is not going to take place until October of 2025. So we're still more than a year out from that if we go by the regular election cycle. So this is disappointing news for conservatives and Pierre Poilievre and also everyone who hates the carbon tax, which I think includes pretty much all of us here on this podcast as well, for reasons that we went through. But we'll go through a little bit more, maybe right now, actually. But yeah, before we go through exactly why the carbon tax sucks, let me just kind of maybe read you some of the counter arguments that people on Reddit have had. As I said, Reddit is also Reddit IPO'd today, by the way. So I'm not gonna buy their stock because I think Reddit actually sucks a lot. Just I have an account and I go on it, but as I said, Reddit has I don't even want to say has become, because it's always been like this, but it's always been a leftist echo chamber, right? And like this is not me being like super partisan, although it's a little bit partisan. But if you just go on r/Canada politics, which is the biggest subreddit about Canadian politics, uh, there's like all of the comments are negative against Pierre Poilievre and pro either pro Trudeau or pro leftist ideologies. So I'll give you an idea of kind of what are the comments that are left on the article about Polyev trying to call an election. And in my opinion, they're all kind of brain dead. But you guys like can make your own decision. This is just my opinion. But essentially, here's the first comment. So this person named Wrong Pineapple 39 says, for someone who supposedly wants to help Canadians, it sucks that he wants to kill the cashback, given his fondness for three words Steven Seagal movie title style catchphrases. I can control the things that would cost me carbon pricing, and that quarterly money in my account really helps. He's just a swampy, power hungry sleazebag. So yeah, I guess like we can respond to these one by one, but let me just kind of go through the comments and read a few more, and then I'll toss it to you guys. But Svensson 26 says, "This is what kills me. If you're critical of the carbon tax, that's fine, but you have to propose a better alternative, which he certainly is not. There's currently a debate as to whether or not the carbon tax is increasing the cost of living for the average Canadian. The Liberals are saying that the rebates you get, the average Canadian is making money or at least breaking even. The Conservatives are saying that if you factor in the estimates for increases of costs of goods due to the carbon tax being applied to manufacturing and shipping, then yes, it will cost you marginally more." Did you think that reducing our emissions would be free? It's obviously going to cost more. It would have cost a hell of a lot less if we did something 30 years ago. It's going to cost a hell of a lot more if we do nothing. But here we have a carbon pricing system that costs the average Canadian barely more, if not makes us money, and already is showing progress in reducing our emissions. That sounds like a pretty great system to me. So what's your plan, Polyev? Because from what I'm hearing, it sounds like his plan is to scrap the tax and replace it with nothing. So that's a fairly long comment. And the last comment that I pulled, I'm going to go through one more. But Class Optimal 7655 says, "Pierre, I can't afford a home. I don't think it's because of the carbon tax, and I don't think it's because trans people can use the bathroom. Conservatives pretended for 2 seconds to care about affordability issues, but having nothing of substance to offer, they quickly collapse into pushing these cultural BS issues." Lots of opinions there. As you can see, most of them anti-conservative or anti-Pierre Polyev. But what do you guys think? Do you guys have the comments on the docket in front of you? Do you want to respond to any of them, or what do you think of the carbon tax or the no confidence vote in general?
I think they're all pretty much around the same idea. They're on some like super heavy duty drugs because, quite frankly, for most Canadians, it's really expensive just to live in general. Because to them, it's like, oh yeah, 1 + 1 = 2. But honestly, it's like it's not like that. You get taxed for the carbon tax, and then what you get in return for the rebate is not nearly enough to compensate for what you get taxed. And I think I mentioned this last week. I'm not sure if I did. I don't think as of right now we know exactly what the carbon tax is going into specifically. Like I don't know if Justin specifically indicated, oh, the carbon tax will go to this. But from my understanding, I have no idea where it goes. So it seems almost useless to have. Life is extremely expensive, and if you increase the carbon tax as of April 1, it's just going to get substantially worse. Like transportation costs will increase. Transportation of goods will cost more. So like grocery stores will cost more, restaurants will cost more, so on and so forth. So I think these three comments are all a common consensus of heavy duty drugs, and they should just do a little more studying and realizing. And what was your other question beyond the comments?
No, I like it was just asking for your response to those three comments. And by the way, I totally agree with you on that. But I'll save my opinion for last. You did have a good point earlier about not knowing where this money is going. So I actually have a screenshot for that. So I didn't make this up. I took this literally straight from the Canadian government website. So it's real. You guys can go on canada.ca and search for it yourself. So if you scroll down to after the comments on your docket there, it says right there, right? So carbon pricing proceeds. all direct proceeds from the federal pricing systems are returned to the province or territory where they are collected. These provinces and territories with their own carbon pricing system use the proceeds as they see fit. So basically they said nothing, right? Like they said we're going to use we're going to let the provinces use the proceeds as they see fit. So you're basically trusting Doug Ford to allocate the money for an environmentally just cause if you're in Ontario, which I don't think like anybody really likes Doug Ford, but it's like even conservatives don't like Doug Ford, but you're so essentially you're trusting him to allocate that money, which is like, okay, if you guys are in Alberta, you're trusting Danielle Smith, right? Maybe she's gonna do a better job. Who knows? But yeah, it's essentially it's like the money is allocated as they see fit, which basically says nothing. And then if you go down to the part about the rebate, so it says approximately 90% of the fuel charge proceeds are used directly to support families throughout Canada through Canada carbon rebates, delivered quarterly by check or direct bank deposits. And 8 out of 10 households get more money back than they spend on the fuel charge. So yeah, basically there's no stipulation as to what you can use the money for. So once you get the money, it's literally up to you as the individual to decide what you spend the money for. So you're not necessarily going to always spend it on carbon neutral or carbon negative policies. In fact, I think we mentioned this last episode. I got the credit, and what did I do with the money? Right, I bought steaks and I got a tank of gas. So yeah, this is what the money is being used for, to answer your question, Dom. But let me pass it to Tristan now. So what do you think of the comments that we just read, and what do you think about the carbon tax in general, and just your thoughts?
So I just want to start us off by saying that the Sevenson comment, the long comment, I think they raise a valid point in that the carbon tax could be costing us not as much money, and that is a potentially necessary thing to resolve our carbon emissions and reduce climate change. The problem with this is that he talks about how it's reducing our emissions. It's already showing progress in reducing our emissions. That sounds great. I would really love to see some proof of that fact, because I haven't seen any. I haven't seen where this money is going to. All I see is this additional cost that is, costing a significant amount of money. The rebates, I do not believe that they are sufficient to counteract the cost of the carbon tax. I just don't believe that. I've seen how much my heating bill has increased, or how much of my heating bills is directly related to the federal carbon tax. So at the end of the day, I'm looking at that going like, what I can see that I am almost undoubtedly paying more than I'm going to be getting through this carbon tax rebate. So if I'm going to pay this money, I want to know what it's being used for, and I want to know that it's being used for something important. And from what I can see, it's not being used for much of anything, because if it was, they'd be advertising it aggressively, because there's been a lot of pushback against it. So to me, it does feel like an additional harm against the cost of living. And like in the regards of the cashback, I'm like, okay, but if I had the money earlier, like, I wouldn't need the cash back, right? So if I didn't have to pay an additional $100 a month in carbon tax on my heating bill, I could go, oh, that's $100 a month that I could spend on other things, instead of having to wait for the cash back to get doled out at the discretion of the government. every Q4. So there's an opportunity cost to that money being doled out at a slower pace, right? Like if I had that money now, I could invest that money, and that money could bring some form of return that I would have received prior to, the arrival of the carbon tax, which rebate, which means that I would have been able to get more money from having that money now, because money now is more valuable than money in the future. So the cashback, and also, to be clear, the carbon pricing, it's not that easy to control. When I look at my NMAX bill, most of the bill for heating is not variable expenses. It is fixed expenses. I have to pay it whether I use more gas or less gas. So I can turn my house heating all the way down and I still pay more money. So what's the, like, I can't control that. I have to heat the house. It's Calgary in minus 17, minus 30, we have to heat the house. So I have to pay for this. So it's like you have to understand that this is increasing the cost of living. And that's just the stuff that I can directly see that I'm spending the money on. And so without a clear communication as to what this money is going to, what this tax is going to, I don't see how my future is being set up in such a fashion that we're going to survive the future climate change problems, because I don't see where the money's going to. If I could clearly understand and see where this money was going to, that I could see that it is going to protecting our future generations, I think that would be a lot more easy to follow. And that's kind of like Sevenson's point there, is that he's trying to say that it would that it's important to do so that we can protect our future, but he throws out that it's showing progress in reducing our emissions with no proof. If it is, I need to know what's doing. And the last point about being unable to afford a home, I don't think the carbon tax is helping your ability to afford a home. I'll say that. Like, I don't think paying more taxes is going to help you afford a home. And then the whole argument for them caring about affordability issues, like, I'm pretty sure the only thing Pierre talks about is housing. Like, not actually, but it's like his main talking point. I understand if you want to criticize him for some of his policies on other things, but at the very least, and again, we don't know what he's going to do when he gets in power, right? We don't know if he's actually going to do anything, but he is definitely talking about affordability issues. So I find it very strange that this guy is saying, it's basically suggesting that they aren't talking about it and they don't care about it. And I'm like, okay, they're talking about it. That suggests that there is some level of care, maybe even if it's just because that's what the people want to hear. So it's just
yeah, as Dom would say, hardcore drugs. These
apparently
guys are smoking. But yeah, I mean, so I think it's worthwhile for me to maybe go through the comments and respond to like these comments individually as to what I think. So bear with me here. But the number one comment, wrong pineapple, good name because she's wrong. It's okay. So here's the thing, right? The whole thing about like quarterly money in my account and kill the cashback, like you got to realize where this money comes from. This money comes from taxes. So it's your own money. So it's not like the government is like helicopter dropping you money. And if they did, that would actually like be also bad because they would print the money out of nothing and then give it to you. But this is like not that much better because like we're all collectively paying the tax and the government is just taking your money, skimming half of it, and then giving the other half back to you. And then you're like, oh, this cashback is a payment from the government. It's money in my account. Like, again, it's your cost of living, your expenses would be lower if they just didn't have the tax in the first place. And I think that this is just something that people don't understand about economics. It's like they complain when the grocery store raises prices. So they're like, "Oh, I don't want to give any more of my money to Galen Weston, who's the CEO of Loblaws, or he's the, I guess, the chairman now because he quit because people gave him too much shit." But whatever, like the owner of Loblaws, which is one of the biggest grocery chain in Canada, right? So it's like I don't want to give my money to Galen Weston Jr. But if it's Trudeau asking, yeah, here's my money, right? Like, why are you so willing to give your money to the government and so unwilling to give your money to the grocery business that provides you with your daily needs, right? So this is my question number one, is like a lot of people have this very twisted view where government is always good and corporations are always bad. It's not that simple, right? Sometimes, and I'm not saying that all corporations are good, I'm not saying that all government is bad, but sometimes you got to look at it from both sides, where sometimes maybe it's the government that's acting in an unreasonable way and it's the corporation that's acting in a reasonable way. So I don't think this person has thought through that kind of dynamic where the government raises your taxes and asks you for more money. You're like, here's my money. But if your grocery store asks you for more money, it's like, oh, this Galen Weston is a sleaze bag. He's just an a-hole or whatever, right? So that's what I have to say to number one. And in response to Svensson 26, um, man, a lot of things here. So where do I even begin? It's like the uh, Canada in general. I think I read somewhere that Canada accounts for like 2% of global carbon emissions, right? So it's like I think there's a debate that we need to have as to how much responsibility everyday Canadians should bear for climate change, right? I understand that we're a developed country. I understand we're one of the richest countries in the world, but there's some nuance to that as well, right? Where a lot of Canadians are struggling just to put food on the table. So yes, we are one of the richest countries on earth, but a lot of people are not feeling exactly that rich at the moment. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. It's like, how much should it cost more, right? So, like that person, Svensson, says, all I have to say is, so what if it costs more? Well, like that could mean the difference. If things cost more, that can make the difference between somebody being able to put food on the table and not being able to put food on the table, or paying rent versus not being able to make rent. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is I kind of disagree the idea that it costs the average Canadian barely more. So I don't think he's taking into account all the secondary effects, right? So maybe he's in a position where he doesn't have to drive to work, so he doesn't have to fill up his car. He doesn't pay for his his own heating costs, so maybe he doesn't see the heating bill. But you are inadvertently paying for all of these things, right? The groceries at the grocery store need to be transported to the grocery store with diesel trucks, which needs to be fueled. So if you increase the cost of transportation, then you inadvertently increase the cost of groceries, which he will probably blame on Galen Weston Jr. Like, like all of these. I don't want to like trigger anybody, but these leftists, let's just call it what it is, right? What the extreme lefties say. It's like, Galen's price gouging us, but what if the price is going up because the cost of transportation has gone up because of this carbon tax, right? So that's just my question that I have to ask is, at what point, like, how much responsibility should the everyday Canadian bear for climate change? And are you willing to sacrifice your lifestyle now in order to save yourself from this future, kind of disaster, right? And I'm not saying that climate change isn't a thing. It definitely is a thing, right? And it's a thing that we need to address. However, it's like, for example, like if you're swimming away from a shark that's trying to eat you, And there's also like at the same time you get a text message from your doctor saying that you might have cancer. Like which one is more important, right? Like both might cause you to die, but you should maybe deal with the shark before you deal with a cancer diagnosis. Like both can kill you, right? If you left like unaccounted for, like responded to. But it's just which one is more immediate, right? Are you willing to sacrifice your life now in order to, maybe like make a difference, right? And as I said, Canadians count for like 2% of global carbon emissions. So even if we just eliminated all carbon emissions, it might not make that much of a difference in terms of climate change, like in the end. But yeah, it's just like how much are you willing to sacrifice now in order to kind of uh, save or help this issue of climate change. So that's kind of my question, and I don't think that Svensson is kind of considering that aspect. Um, and also, I kind of disagree with the idea that rebates would get back more in rebates. I think what he was referring to was kind of this line in the carbon rebates section of the Canadian government website that I shared, where it's like 8 out of 10 households would get more money back spending on the fuel charge. But that's just the fuel charge by itself, right? What about the secondary effects of like all the other things that the carbon tax applies to, right? So I think if you do the math in the end, you do end up paying more in the increased carbon tax than you do with the money getting back. And if you think about it, that's the only way that it would make sense, right? Because why would they rebate you more money than what you're paying, right? That would be like if you bought a laptop for $1,000 and then you get a rebate for $1,200. It's like, where's the money coming from? Like, what's the point, right? Why don't they just give you a free laptop and they can save $200, right? So this idea that you're getting more back in rebates than you're paying in taxes, it fundamentally does not make sense. And lastly, to respond to the last question from Class Optimal, it's like I home affordability is a huge issue, and this is something that we've been talking about for multiple episodes on this podcast. But um, you can't say that the carbon tax doesn't matter just because it doesn't help you like buy a house. Like that argument, those two things, like they don't mesh with each other, right? That's like saying like, okay, if you can't afford a house, then increasing the carbon tax is going to actually put you further away from being able to buy a house, right? And you can't say that the carbon tax doesn't matter even if it's small. That's like saying like, okay, if it doesn't matter, then I could show up at your house and take $5 from you every day, and $5 isn't going to help you buy a house. It's not probably not going to even like change your life by that much if you lost an extra $5 per day. But would you not care if I showed up at your house and took $5 from you every day? You would probably still care, right? And obviously this person is biased against the conservatives because he's mad about some other like trans issue and like cultural war issues. I'm not going to get into that. I think he's just kind of deflecting at that point. We're talking about the carbon tax in this article, and like nobody brought up trans issues, and I just think that he's deflecting. So that's kind of like you throw a distraction when you're losing the fight. Right? It's kind of what it feels like. And one last thing before I pass it back to you guys. If you guys scroll down to the very bottom, you can see the Canadian standard of living, and this is measured in, I believe, per capita, real GDP per capita. And you can see that um, both Canada and the US took a big dip during the pandemic, but the US has bounced back in a strong way in GDP per capita, and Canada has not. In fact, things are worse now in terms of a real GDP per capita basis compared to like, man, you have to go like really far back, like 2017, I think was the last time it was this low. So we're actually like worse now than even before the pandemic, right? So there's just some food for thought, right? So this is again, uh, increasing the carbon tax is going to only make the situation worse, and that's why I'm against it, and that's why I say axe the tax. But essentially, like yeah, essentially that's all I have to say. Pass it back to you guys.
I think everyone's points were extremely valid. I think the main thing out of all of it is, man, if we had the choice, axe to tax, no confidence vote goes through election, but we don't live in a perfect world apparently, so it is what it is.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. A couple things I wanted to bring up, like with Sevenson's comment again. Just one thing I just noticed as we were going through it some more, and Andy was going over it. The whole argument of it costs the average Canadian barely more. I suspect, I don't have proof to back this up, but I suspect that this is a comment from someone who makes above the average income. This is someone who is making a reasonable wage, and they're like, I spend a little bit more extra money. It's not that big of a deal. I got to protect against climate change, right? The problem is not going to hurt someone who is in that scenario as much as someone who is going from, I can now afford to pay rent and buy groceries, to rent, groceries. Which do I choose? So I think that is I think that's a factor that is maybe being missed in a lot of this. Is that I think that a lot of people, particularly people who are well educated and have a lot to say on these political topics, they tend to not have had a lot of awareness brought to them to the scenario of the average person, because they are above average and they hang out with above average people and they go, well, things are fine for me. But if you look at the average person, and then there's also the people who are below average in terms of income, you'll see that they are being squeezed very, very much so, at a much greater degree than the higher income folks, and that this carbon tax will potentially become a factor in decisions with purchasing, where they're like, can I afford to fill up my car or buy groceries today? And I think that's a big factor that they're kind of missing. And then the standard of living, I feel like we can all see that's been declining. I think every single one of us has woken up and been like, yep, life is a little bit worse than it was. So I just wanted to bring up those couple points.
No, I think you really hit the nail on the head on that one, right? It's like, I think this, what you said about people making, average or above average income, I think maybe that applies to us, this group as well. But the difference between like us and Svensson is that we recognize the fact that, it's not gonna like really cripple us, right? Like, for example, for Tristan, you are watching your heating bills pretty closely, right? And then if, let's say, like tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but April 1st, when this tax increase passes, and then your heating bill goes up by an extra $200 per month. It might not even be that much, but let's just say it's extra $200 per month on top of what you're paying now. It's not going to financially cripple you, right? Like, you're going to be absolutely fine. But it's like, we have the kind of the wisdom to recognize that it's not about us. Like, it's not about you, Tristan, personally, right? It's not about me, and it's not about you, Dom, either. It's about like the people that are kind of on the edge, where maybe a $200 or even just a $100 increase per month in what they need to live, i.e., heating their homes, just that will maybe make the difference between putting food on the table and not putting food on the table, right? So it's kind of like like Svensson is volunteering us all for this increase in like the cost of living, without, I think, really thinking about or getting the approval of the people that are gonna experience the negative effects of this the most.
I think on that front, the line that at which people are at, where we are close, like the line at which people are at where it's like an additional expense is a big major problem. I think that line is there's a lot more people who are walking that line now than there were in the past. Like I think there's a lot more people who are you know, a $200 a month bill away from, you know, buying filling up the car or buying dinner, right? And I think that that's something that we aren't taking into account. Like I don't think these people are necessarily aware of how tight a lot of people's budgets are. And yeah, I think it's very much like, you know, as we said, like I understand that an additional cost to my heating bill is not going to affect me financially long term, realistically, that much. But I can understand as well that there are many people out here who that additional cost would sink the ship, theoretically, like metaphorically. So
Yeah,
yeah.
Tom, you were gonna say something?
I just wanted to add some things. So in like a perfect world, for example, if let's say, for example, the economy is doing extremely well and you're able to like lower interest rates, I guess you can kind of argue that the carbon tax would be reasonable on the condition that the government tells us exactly what they do with the carbon tax and where it's specifically going to go. And if it seems like an approvable thing, yeah, sure. But I think the issue right now is that bank interest rates are so flippin' high and the cost of living is so expensive. Inflation's through the roof, and people are just scraping pennies in order to be able to pay things like what you guys were saying. I think maybe now is not the time for the carbon tax, axe the tax, and arguably bring it back under a different economic circumstance. And that would be the move. I think axe the tax for now. And yeah, Tristan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think you're right on the money in the sense of like I'm not even necessarily opposed to a carbon tax. I am if the carbon tax was being used for something and I could see what it was being used for and I could see that it was helping our future, I may even be for it. The problem is the optics of it, and then the fact that we're clearly in a scenario where cost of living is shooting to the moon. You know, no one can afford anything. It's really not the time to be increasing a tax that is already going to be costing us a lot of money. You want to put the tax on at a later date with clear optics as to what it's being used for. Potentially go for it. You know, I'm not even necessarily like I'm not even sitting here going, this carbon tax is a bad idea. I'm really just going, I don't know what it's used for. Everyone's broke. Why are you making life more expensive? And I'm just like,
Nothing but facts. Yeah,
No,
there it
no,
is.
totally. And like, you know, going back to that comment, it's like the person was like, did you think that reducing our emissions would be free? It's obviously going to cost more. I think that statement is just quite frankly incredibly insulting. And as you said, Tristan, this is probably someone who's sitting in their $1 million or maybe even multi-million-dollar suburbia home in the GTA or in Vancouver or somewhere like well off. That's like, okay, who can't afford 3 cents extra per liter of gas? Who can't afford $100 extra in heating costs, right? Like it's gonna cost you barely more, and you just have to pay up to Daddy Trudeau because he says he's gonna use the money to make the environment better and make the birds sing again and make the snow go away or whatever, whatever it is that the government says that they're gonna try to do, but we haven't seen any evidence of them doing. So yeah, I quite frankly find that insulting to everyone who is, as you said, Tristan, on the edge of being able to afford things. And it's just There's got to be a better way, right? And it all goes back to my point of why do people trust the government with this money when they're not willing to trust the grocery store, right? Like if you spend more at the grocery store, you automatically think Galen Weston Jr. is going to go and buy a new yacht. But if Trudeau increases the tax, you think that, oh, Trudeau's definitely going to use this money for something meaningful. It's like, well, why? Like I think that statement needs to be justified, and you need to find actual evidence. And it all goes back to just like the cost of living in Canada and how it's a huge problem right now, and we don't need to be making it worse.